On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the CEO of the company that owns Vezhen said, the anchor broke. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So in a previous episode, we looked at the motor vessel Vezhen coming out of Russia, heading to South America with a load of fertilizer on board when the ship was suspected of dragging an anchor and severing a cable between Estonia and Sweden. The Swedish Coast Guard apprehended the vessel and brought it into southern Sweden for inspection. Well, now we have the first kind of images and reports coming from the ship. The CEO of the company, Alexander Kelchev, gave a press briefing where he talked specifically about it. So we're going to go ahead and break this down and talk specifically about what happened to the vessel. This is Vezhen right now at anchor off of southern Sweden. You can see the anchor in question there, housed in the port anchor left side is the one right there in front of you. You'll notice you only see one of the two flukes of the anchor. One of the flukes has broken off, but it is that housed anchor, the port anchor that you see there, that is the one in question. So Captain Kalchev gave a statement, and I have the statements here. The first statement he gave was this: due to the impact of the waves, the anchor moved, albeit minimally, until this eventually ended up loosening the wire holding the chain, which gave first. Okay, there are several measures that hold an anchor in place. I talked about this in the last episode. What he is saying that broke here was the wire chain. That is the last thing that should be holding the anchor in place. This is the fail-safe for everything else, and he talks about this breaking first. This is the image here of the anchor chain. You can see the chain heading down into the hawse pipe. The hawse pipe is the pipe that goes through the vessel out to the anchor. This right here is a turnbuckle. It is hooked up, affixed to the ship. So this is locked onto the ship at the very top. And at the bottom, there is a shackle with wire that is attached to the chain. This is meant, if everything else fails, to hold the anchor so that the anchor does not run. Yet, Captain Kalchev talks about the fact that this is what is going to fail. He says, then the anchor hanged only on the guillotine stopper. If we look at marine traffic, you'll see when the ship was coming out, it did experience some weather. So here it is in the Gulf of Finland. You see the ship is experiencing crosswinds of roughly about 22 knots, swells and waves that give you a significant wave height of about 1.9 meters. As the ship came further out of the Gulf of Finland into the Baltic, that wave height increased to about 2.7 meters. As it proceeds southbound or southwest toward Gotland Island, the wave heights do diminish down to 1.4 meters with a headwind of 21 knots. And then when it was in position off of Gotland, you'll see that the headwinds are down to 13 knots, but the significant heights are only 0.8 meters. And it's important to note that Captain Kalchev is arguing that that is not exactly accurate. He is using a more advanced weather system than marine traffic to say, listen, we had much higher waves and more severe wind than we experienced. So the ship bore the blows of every wave that crashed into the axis of the ship, which little by little led to its wear and tear and the gradual leakage of the chain into the sea. So let me use this image to explain what is happening here. So we're seeing the anchor chain right here. Here's the anchor hanging out. Now this is the starboard side. It's actually the port side on the vessel in question, Vezhen. For this, we had the chain stopper, which is actually located right here. On this one, it showed holding the chain here. In the case of Vezhen, the chain stopper is actually hanging down here into the hawse pipe. This ship has what's called a riding pawl. In the case of Vezhen, it has the guillotine lock. So the guillotine lock is in place, and then you have the brake. What he is saying has happened is that the chain broke so that was no longer in place. The guillotine lock, the pin had bent and broke and therefore was allowed to move, which allowed the chain to start rolling. The thing he doesn't explain, which is really the most important thing, is why is the brake off? Why is the brake loose? He's saying that because of the pounding motion, the brake begins to loosen a bit and the chain begins to run. Now, I should mention that there could be a fourth measure to lock this anchor in place, and that is if the clutch was engaged. To hold the anchor up and down, you engage a clutch, and it's a physical clutch. It's a big, huge metal gear that you physically lock in, and that allows you to use these controllers to hoist and lower the anchor under control. There's no mention of whether or not that was in place. So what you're seeing here is literally at least a triple failure, if not a quadruple failure, that leads to the fall of this anchor. He goes on to say, there's no way to calculate at what point the wire and guillotine would give way and drop the anchor at the exact moment when the ship is next to the cable in order to deliberately cause an accident. Okay, so again, you have to believe at this point that the ship comes out of the Gulf of Finland, experiences this rough weather, all these systems fail, and the anchor begins to slowly fall out of the ship and begin to slowly ease itself down. It's not a wild run of the anchor. It's just a gradual slip that is taking place. Goes on to say, we don't have anchor indicators on these ships. When ordering the vessels, we decided that we didn't need these, that most ships will not order anything unless they need them. These ships have an open tank that is constantly flooded with water. Okay, some ships will have the anchor chains below the foredeck, actually in an enclosed space. This ship has the anchor windlass up on deck, so that when you're taking waves over, you're having basically a wet machinery up there. And the devices that are normally affixed to the anchor to indicate movement would not work for long. That's basically what he says. So when he says for a closed tank vessel, that's what he means. I assume it's the translation here not being very good. Goes on, the political coloring of this case is probably very interesting, but it negatively affects not only the image of the company, but also of Bulgaria. The truth of the facts must come out. So he's obviously worried about being sued for this for very good reason. As you see here over at Marine Traffic, the beneficial owner of the ship is Navigation Maritime Bulgaria, or Navbulg, as is noted on the side of the vessel. This is based out of Bulgaria. Hi-Quo Shipping, located in Bulgaria, is the registered owner. However, Hi-Quo Shipping is out of Hong Kong, and so the true owner of this vessel we believe to be Chinese. The classification group is DNV out of Oslo, but more importantly, it is West of England Ship Owners Mutual Insurance Association that has the protection and indemnity for this vessel, meaning that West of England P&I is the company that would be responsible for damages coming against them. So it's one of the reasons that Captain Kolchev obviously doesn't want this to be seen as being done intentionally by the ship. Now he goes on, the ship's civil liability insurance is taken out with one of the three largest insurers in the world. Absolutely true. Navibulgar works with the largest charterers in the world. Our ship is brand new, and in no way can we be included in this so-called gray fleet. So he's worried about being lumped in with ships like the Eagle S and Yiping 3 that are part of the Shadow Fleet hauling Russian cargo, not in violation of sanctions, but to get around sanctions. That's one of the big misnomers of the Russian Gray Fleet or Dark Fleet, is that it's operating illegally. It's not. But most of those vessels are identified as ships of pretty low standards. This is not. This is a brand new ship. This is a ship with a very reputable flag. It's Malta. It is good classification society, good insurance. So that is not the case there. This is the one thing that's really flagging this ship as not being a potential, intentional cable dragger. However, with these failures, I have to note that these failures could be caused by the weather, but they could also be caused by a crew member on board. He goes on here, however, there are no representatives from the team that will conduct the investigation for which the ship was diverted. In other words, the Swedish team has yet to board the vessel and conduct their investigation. They are probably currently examining the actual damage to the cable, damage to the hull, marks, etc. The investigation is probably ongoing, but there are no investigators on board the ship, and no interviews have been conducted with the crew. So obviously, that is going to happen. The Swedes are not going to allow this ship to go. The ship has admitted basically culpability, except they're saying it's an accident. They're saying it was not done on purpose. Should note that there have been reports coming out, and I mentioned this in the previous video, on Eagle S, that the Eagle S, there is a U.S. investigation. The story came out in the Washington Post that this was a accidental drop. However, that has not been conclusively proved. The Finns debate that, and I've used the Finns' saucy language, which was they called bullshit on it. Yiping 3 was believed to have done the same thing. However, Yiping 3 was able to get out of the Baltic into international waters and eventually leave the area. New Polar Bear, which is the first vessel that did it, was believed to be an accident, but now we're on our fourth element. And while accidental anchor drops do occur, and they do, I mean, I've seen them, I know they do occur, and I've seen reports of them that they do happen, 4 of them in a brief period of time in the Baltic is highly improbable. Now, the Baltic is a busy place. 2,000 ships at any one time are sailing on the Baltic. Any month, there's 35 to 4,000 different ships up on the Baltic. So this is a really busy piece of real estate up there, and dragging an anchor could potentially happen. But again, the question really comes, this is a brand new ship, and a ship encountering not abnormal weather should not lose their anchor. Now, it could be gross mismanagement and gross incompetence in seamanship. That is distinctly possible. It depends on who the crew is. Understand, post-COVID, we've had a lot of issues with crews on board vessels, and we lost a lot of mariners because of COVID. And ships are doing everything they can to hire really cheap mariners, and that could be the case in this situation. So what do I think? I think that there's more to the story than what we're getting. I'm wondering whether or not either prudent seamanship was done, or there was somebody on board that decided to go ahead and let this anchor loose in the perfect weather to go ahead and let this anchor loose so that there's deniability about it. Again, once, twice, 3 times, and now 4 times within a very short span of period, that's very unusual. It's causing a lot of consternation among the Baltic states and nations in and around that region. Obviously, the only nation that is not in NATO right now on the Baltic is Russia. So this is causing a lot of issues, raising heckles among the Danes, the Swedes, the Finns, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Germany. I mean, everybody is up in arms about this. And it does have the potential to make the Baltic a much more contentious piece of real estate now. We've seen it with the Black Sea since February of 2022. We've seen it with the Red Sea. Remember, the Red Sea hasn't died down yet. Even though we've got the ceasefire in Israel and Gaza, we still haven't quite seen anywhere near vessels come back into the Red Sea, but now we're seeing it in the Baltic. I'll keep you posted on this story as it comes. Got a video coming up here shortly too with some updates on 4 vessels. A lot of weird things going on, especially in the ice. There's a lot of things going on. We've got a Russian icebreaker getting into collision. We had a ship up on Lake Erie that had to be saved. We've got new reports on the motor vessel Dolly, and her coming out of the shipyard looks like a brand new ship. You would not swear a bridge fell on that vessel. And then we have a ship on fire in the Red Sea. We don't think it was caused by the Houthis. We think that this is a container ship with a container fire. But I have that video putting together for you and hope to drop it over the weekend. Until our next episode, this is Sal. Sign off.